Welcome to 60 Skills. And the topic of today's discussion is the role of the grind and routine. Now, contrary to popular belief, very few people are born with natural abilities in esoterica. What most people are born with is varying degrees of sensitivity or clairsentience with regards to subtle energy. And this is a good starting point because the easiest way to begin training the subtle senses, or esoterica in general, or magic if you will, or any of the yogic or meditative abilities, is through the clairsentience gate. So if you have a bit of a head start in this, this is very helpful. Now, most of the better schools out there utilize exercises like building the ball in order to increase this. And that can be done relatively quickly. A sensitive person will get it within a matter of minutes, and someone less sensitive, it may take 10 or 15 hours worth of work over a week or two. That said, you very quickly get into the issue of training a variety of skills. And this is where the grind, or routine, becomes very important. Because as many of us know from athletics, there are many naturally gifted athletes out there that really never go very far in their athletic career because they rely too much on their natural ability versus comprehensive long-term training. And in this regard, the yogic arts are absolutely no different. Now, what is the minimum required to advance yogically over time? In general, I've found 2 hours of training a day works out very well. 1 hour of training a day can work depending upon the discipline of the individual involved, but we'll discuss that in a moment. And greater amounts of training time are relatively uncommon because people simply need to make a living and they may not have that much time available to them. So, how do you get the grind to work? Well, simply put, you make your practice part of your daily routine. You block off a certain amount of time every day at preferably the same time, and it just becomes part of what you do. It doesn't matter if you feel good, it doesn't matter if you feel bad. When it's that time of day, you stop everything else you're doing and you go practice. Now, this can be done comprehensively, such as taking the 60 skills from the 60 skills system, performing 5 minutes of each using a mala, and you just rotate through that. That, however, can take the better part of 6 hours a day. What tends to work in practice more often is people figure out a specific line of training. Say, working with the elements and establishment of equilibrium. They break down the individual techniques they need to train in order to do that, such as 30 minutes of each element, and then supporting skills like single point of focus and building the ball or body training, and then they perform that for their 2 hours a day. Once you reach an acceptable level of performance at whatever that given skill set is, you now move into another set of skills. So, okay, as an example, once you have the elemental work down, you switch over and you begin to work on your clairvoyance and clairaudience so you can communicate more clearly with the subtle worlds. That in turn becomes a separate block of training that you give your 2 hours a day to, and you go on from there. Maybe you're a martial artist who's primarily interested in body training, so your fighting skills are much more potent. Again, you would schedule your weightlifting exercises, your posture holding exercises, and then the supporting energy work. So breaking this down into coherent blocks can be a little tricky. One of the goals of the 60 skill system is to make it very clear how to do this so you can pursue the training that supports your personal goals. But here's the important part of that. If you're just relying upon yourself to think of doing it every day, you're generally going to fail. So my advice is you build this into your routine. And then the performance of that routine over time is that grind effect that allows you to slowly chip away at things. Now, perfect practice is great, but a perfect practice is of very little value if it's something you only rarely do. And this is the reason why I often say it doesn't matter how you feel. When it's that time of day, you go practice. Now, there are certain things, such as evocation, where if you've engaged in a variety of negativistic behavior, you don't want to do that. But those are, in general, more exceptions than the rule. All right, so if you're engaged in a regular routine and you've got the grind aspect of this down, how long does it generally take to develop a baseline of ability at these things? Well, historically, about 3 months. This is the reason why a lot of systems say things like 100 days to build the foundation. Because as a functional matter, that's about how long it takes to build that into your body. As we've often mentioned, you have to keep in mind that everything in the meditative, yogic, and magical arts relies upon the stress adaptation cycle. And it takes your body about 90 days to build new blood cells. It likewise takes your body about 90 days to maximize endocrine system effects if that's what you're focusing on. Also, as an interesting data point, I found that people who engage in comprehensive body training, whether that's through the rebounding or throwing techniques or weightlifting or what have you, have found that it takes about 90 days for that cycle of training the soft tissue to initially peak. This also applies to things like a linear progression for novices in weightlifting. It takes a minimum of 90 and usually closer to 180 days. Now, depending upon where you're at genetically when you start, it might take 90 days to do this, or it might take 2 cycles of 180 days. But again, this classical setup of 100 days seems to work pretty well. Now again, at the end of that 90 days, you'll have that baseline effect. This doesn't mean an advanced or even intermediate level effect. It just means you'll have the basic ability to perform something to an adequate enough level that you can move on to the next block of training. Again, anecdotally, what I've seen, particularly things like body training or the rebounding techniques, it takes that initial 90 days to build the tissue. And then over the next 90 days, when the harder part of that practice has been ceased and you're on a maintenance level, you begin to see ultimately what you get to keep. As a functional matter, many of my teachers, Mark Rasmus most notably, but there are others, have mentioned that you need to practice about 1/10 as much to maintain an ability as it took you to generate it. So if you practice with the elements 10 hours a week, then you only need to practice about 1 hour a week to maintain the level of ability you initially generated. So on and so on and so on. Additionally, you may want to cycle through blocks of training from time to time. So you work on your body training really hard for 90 days, you switch over to maybe elements or clairvoyance or single pointed focus training afterwards for another 90 days, and then you go back and you revisit the body training again. For those of you who are, again, familiar with weightlifting or athletic endeavors, this corresponds very closely to classical block training and is very effective. As this is a phenomenon in the real world, all of this makes sense. Hence the term yogic engineering. So these are things to keep in mind and realize that there are no shortcuts. Natural ability will only get you so far, but the discipline born of routine, because discipline itself really doesn't exist without routine, is an excellent way to go about pursuing this. So if you liked today's discussion, please hit the like button down below and consider subscribing to the channel. Additionally, if you'd like to learn more about the 60 Skills curriculum, check out the details portion below the video. Otherwise, train hard and be well.